Hello, and welcome to our next installment of the LoRa Alliance technical webinar series that focuses on LoRaWAN security. We will discuss how LoRaWAN provides a secure means of transmitting data and review best practices in IoT security. A couple of notes before we begin. All right. If you experience any issues with audio or video, just press F5 on your keyboard. It will prompt a system refresh and resolve most technical issues. Make sure to submit any questions you have through the Q&A box located on your screen. Feel free to submit them at any point during the webcast. Speakers will be answering those questions at the end. You can download these slides along with other resources on your audience console. If you are not currently viewing a console, click the launch symbol located below the video player. And rewatch this webinar anytime using the same webcast link. It will be available 24 hours after the conclusion of this webcast. All right, and our speakers today are Alper Yegin. He is the Chief Technology Officer at Actility, and he is also the Vice Chairman of the Technical Committee for the LoRa Alliance. And our other speaker will be Robert Cragie. He is our new Director of Security at LoRa Alliance. So I will hand this off to Alper to kick off this webcast.
Thank you, Chansey. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our security webinar. I would like to start this webinar by describing our network reference model. It is very essential to understand the end-to-end architecture, to understand the roles and responsibilities of different elements, and how we provide security across the board. So in our LoRaWAN network reference model, we have the end device. This is where we have the sensor and the actuators that connects to the network using the wireless LoRaWAN connectivity. On the other end of this wireless connectivity is the radio gateway. In generic terminology, you can call it also a base station. And one or more such radio gateways are aggregated under a so-called network server, which not only terminates the LoRaWAN link layer, but it also manages the end devices and their connectivity to the application platforms. And in the network side, we also have a dedicated entity called join server. This is the centralized authentication server, authentication and key management server. And it's used for authenticating the end device for joining the network. And finally, the application server is where the application data from the end device ends up. And that's where the sensor data gets collected, or that's where the commands that are sent down to the end device are generated from. An ultimate goal is to get the data flow between the end device and the application server with the help of radio gateway for the radio connectivity and network server for aggregating the connectivity from multiple radio gateways, and the join server to manage the keys and the authentication procedure. And if we look at this model with the security domain in mind, what we see is there are two domains. One side is the wireless network. The other side is the backend infrastructure. On the wireless network side, again, we have the end device and the radio gateway. And for each, we can talk about platform security. So the end device platform security is about protecting the hardware and the software that puts together the end device. And the platform security is agnostic of wireless communication technology. Whether we're talking about Wi-Fi, Zigbee, or 5G, we'd still be talking about an end device platform security. These are the kind of things to prevent software from tampering, also for, the hardware from intrusion. Now, between the end device and the radio gateway, we have the wireless network realm, and this is very much the focus of this presentation. And on the network side, among all the elements like the radio gateway, network server, application server, and join server, these are the network elements of the backend infrastructure. And here we talk about the infrastructure security. And here too, the type of security we talk about is very generic. Whether one is running a web server or a LoRaWAN network server, we talk about similar types of security measures like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and things like that. Now, we have a little bit of a color coding in here. So what you see as the yellow and blue sections, these are security elements provided by the LoRaWAN architecture. Between the end device and the network server, we have the blue part that provides integrity and privacy. And then on top of that, we have the end-to-end security, the yellow part that runs between the end device and the application server. And the green designated areas are for the backend, and this is where we deploy typical backend security using protocols like IPsec, TLS, etc. So when it comes to securing wireless networks, we cannot really rely on physical security. The wireless radio signals goes all around. We cannot really stop them using walls or guards or wires, right? And for that, we need to rely on cryptographic security. Now, in the absence of any cryptographic security, a wireless medium is subject to unauthorized access, spoofing, modification, eavesdropping. And this is exactly why we resort to cryptography to bring the level of security we have with wireless networks to the same level as with wired networks, which rely on physical security. And I will be talking about how we achieve that. So the foundation, well, any cryptographic security that is used for wireless network architectures, it relies on credentials. These are the credentials that gets used for performing mutual endpoint authentication. So in our architecture, it is the end device and the joint server that authenticates each other for the end device to receive connectivity service. And for this authentication, we use symmetric cryptography, and it involves identifiers being known to the endpoints. So the joint server is identified by joint EUI, which is a globally unique identifier, and the end device is identified by Dev EUI, and they share a so-called app key, which is a root key, and this is a 128-bit AES 128 key that is used for mutual endpoint authentication. And this is where everything starts from. And having those credentials installed in place, we run the so-called joint procedure, also known as an activation procedure. And this is a cryptographic handshake. By using the credentials that are known to both endpoints, there's a handshake that goes through the network server, but the network server is not part of this cryptographic handshake. It's just a conduit forwarding the messages. And at the end, this handshake accomplishes mutual endpoint authentication. And it is not only used for performing mutual endpoint authentication, but also generating ephemeral session keys. And for that, we generate two sets of session keys. One is the so-called network session key. It is shared between the end device and the network server to provide a secure network link between the two. And then another session key is generated, so-called application session key, that is shared between the end device and the application server to provide end-to-end security and, most specifically, confidentiality. And by the way, you might have noticed the title on the slide, it has OTAA inside the parentheses. That means over-the-air activation. And a little later, I'll tell you there's another mode of operation called ABP, activation by personalization. In the OTA, we use an explicit handshake to generate these session keys. And in the ABP case, we jumpstart the system without doing any handshake. Instead, we already start with the session keys. This time, these session keys are not ephemeral. They're permanent, long-term session keys. And as such, they're also customized for a given network server. With the OTA, the end device and the joint server could run the activation against any network server and generate a session and session keys for the chosen network server. But in case of ABP, the end device is personalized against a specific network server with whom it already shares the session keys. There's no way to use this end device against another network server with the given session keys. And again, we just skip ahead and we don't run the join procedure. Instead, we just run with the pre-installed session keys. And that's why you don't see the join server in this architecture. It's shaded. So, well, having provided two modes of operation, OTA and ABP, clearly we highly recommend using OTA, because with the OTA, there's a join procedure which can generate fresh new session keys. And being able to rekey the sessions is good for crypto strength of your system against any potential crypto analysis. And also, we have something called frame counters, which we need to keep incrementing in each frame. With the ABP, the end device needs to have a non-volatile memory to remember the last used frame counter in case it reboots, to continue from where it was left off. But in case of OTA, if the device were to reboot, if it didn't retain the context, it can very well run another join procedure and still have the strong security provided by the LoRaWAN framework. Now, so having said OTA is better than ABP, there might be some reasons for you to choose ABP, such as if the device is uplink only, it cannot complete the join procedure, which requires the end device to receive a join accept message. So for an uplink only device, you would have to resort to ABP, but at least now you know the limitations of it, and you can safeguard your system against potential threats. Then let's look at what we do with all the session keys. So when the end device has a LoRaWAN frame to send, imagine it has a payload, and that payload is clear text as provided by the application from above, right? What the end device does is first it encrypts that clear text payload using the application session key, and that's how it gets the encrypted payload. Then the end device generates a message integrity code, which is like a signature. It's a hash, it's a keyed, one-way keyed hash using the payload and the network session key. And through that, now the frame is ready to be transmitted over the air. Now, we had already accomplished the mutual endpoint authentication through activation, the join procedure. And thanks to the message integrity code, this frame over the air is protected against, or we can ensure data origin authentication such that the receiver can check the sender, which is the device address, and by checking the message integrity code can know it is really sent by the device identified by the device address. And the integrity is protected. If any bit is flipped in mid-air, the message integrity code will fail. And this is also protected against replays because the frame counter is a monotonically increasing number. And the receiver expects it to be incremented all the time. A repeat or going back won't be allowed. It'll be discarded as replay. And the data is encrypted end-to-end thanks to us encrypting the payload. So this is how we use, and this is how we eliminate all the threats stemming from use of wireless communication technology. And regarding the cryptography, like I said, we use AES 128, and we use several industry standard cryptographic algorithms like AES block cipher, AES ECB, AES CMAC. Now, having said we are using AES 128 in a future version of our specification, we are also introducing crypto agility, which means we will be able to support other crypto suites as well, like AES 256. And which crypto suite gets used will be negotiated between the end device and the network. And this will provide us future-proofing our technology and your implementations and your deployments. So in summary, for the very first part, before I hand it over to my colleague, Robert, so this is how we secure our protocols and architecture. And through that, we achieve integrity and replay protection, data origin authentication, end-to-end application payload encryption. And we have the ability to refresh sessions through activation. And the standard comes from the LoRa Alliance, but is also formally validated, approved, and published by ITU as well. If you go and download ITU-T Y.4480, you will see this is the LoRaWAN Layer 2 spec version 1.0.4. And it's part of our collaboration with ITU, which also provides us the blessing of ITU and the validation of the quality of our specification. So with that, now I would like to turn the floor to Robert. And Robert, it's all yours now.
Okay, thank you very much, Alper. I'll be, first of all, talking about the back-end infrastructure security. So Alper's already mentioned a little bit about this, so I'll just go into a little bit more detail. So in the back-end, we have these network elements, radio gateway, network server, join server, and application server, which Alper's already introduced. And we have to consider here the perimeter security, the platform security, and the communication security. So by platform security, again, these are typically PC-based devices or rack servers, that sort of thing. So there'll be a certain amount of security expected with these devices. And again, we'd expect HSMs perhaps in some of these devices, especially the join server, to provide secure storage for secrets and credentials you don't want to expose, private keys, that sort of thing. Perimeter security, that's all about who has access to these devices, user accounts, privilege levels, that sort of thing, what you'd expect. And, again, how you actually ingress to that, displays, how you can get into them, that sort of thing. So these are the things you have to consider with regards to the network elements. And also the communication security, which, again, this builds on top of the LoRaWAN Foundation security, which is already there, which Alper's explained. So again, if we look at the same infrastructure with roaming, it's the same picture really. The only difference here is we have these network servers with different roles, so a forwarding network server, serving network server, and a home network server. And again, you'd protect them all in the same way. So what we'll look at now is focusing on the communication security really between these. Again, we have the TS2 backend interfaces specification, and this has a clause in it which says network elements shall, again, capital letters, so this is a requirement, shall rely on a security solution that can provide mutual endpoint authentication, integrity and replay protection, and confidentiality when communicating with each other. So again, Alper mentioned a couple of things like IPsec, or you could use VPNs or HTTPS, TLS. There's a number of standard ways of securing communication between servers and devices in the cloud or in the private network or whatever. And those sort of decisions can be made by the system implementers as to how they want to provide that level of communication security. But again, it's not optional. You can't not have any security between these. It's a requirement for a LoRaWAN system. And again, TS2 actually standardizes the communication protocol between these two. And again, one would expect that to be part of the payload of a TLS packet or IPsec packet, again, depending on which type of standard you're choosing to provide communication security between the network elements. So just summarizing the backend security and what Alper described, this picture really shows all the layers, if you like, multiple levels of encryption, integrity protection, and so forth that we have all the way from the end device to the application server. So in the middle here, the sort of middle of the stick of rock, if you like, this blue is the end-to-end encryption. So this is end-to-end between end device, application server. So none of the intermediate network elements or indeed an eavesdropper on the wireless network can actually work out any of this data because it's encrypted. And the key shared between the application server and the end device, the app S key, does that encryption. And then around that, you have this additional integrity protection between the end device and the network server. And again, the device, the tunnel here, if you like, on the right is the communication security I just referred to between the network elements themselves. And this box here, again, emphasizes that the gateway device can't access any data. It doesn't have any keys, any LoRaWAN keys. It's really just to transfer data from the wireless network into the back-end infrastructure. And again, the network server cannot access the application data because that's end-to-end encrypted between the end device and the application server. So again, there's a link there for more webinar videos, which we have on the LoRa Alliance website. These are previous ones we've presented. So now I'd like to just talk about firmware update over the air. This is a specification, one of the portfolio of specifications of LoRaWAN, the LoRa Alliance has, and this can be summed up by this diagram here. So essentially this allows the transfer of a binary image, typically a firmware image, through a LoRaWAN system to end devices, and that can be multiple end devices at the same time using multicast or to an individual end device. And there's two aspects here. It's important for security because one aspect of security is being able to update your device in the field. If these are deployed in the field, you want an easy way to actually update that device with maybe a security patch, or if there's a functionality change in the application, you may want to do that as well. And this provides a secure way of doing that. So it enhances the overall security of the LoRaWAN system by providing that facility. And the firmware update itself has its own protections. So the firmware itself has to be signed, so it can't be tampered with during the transfer. And again, there's integrity protection as well on the multicast based on a group key, or if it's provided to individual devices, it's integrity protected using the device key. So I'd like now to talk a little bit more about just general IoT security. So a LoRaWAN device generally falls into the category of IoT, Internet of Things. So what do we mean by Internet of Things? It's really a device as opposed to something like a PC or a laptop or a tablet or a phone. And you know, these have challenges, and I'll come on to those in a minute. LoRaWAN devices are typically these IoT devices, and an IoT device always has some sort of connectivity. And again, in the case of LoRaWAN, it's the LoRa wireless network. That's used, the LoRaWAN wireless network. So IoT security does have significant challenges beyond standard IT security. When we use PCs, laptops, etc., they tend to work on a well-known operating system. They have their own security mechanisms. Web browsers use HTTPS. It's pretty much standard these days. But IoT, again, they have very diverse application areas, and it means all the devices are very, very different, whereas one PC is not massively different to another PC, for example. And because of these diverse application areas, some devices may require very high security, say a door lock, for example. You want that to be very secure, so it can't be tampered with and people can't get into your premises. For other devices, IoTs, like maybe toys for children or something like that, it may not have to be quite so secure, or even data collection networks may not need the same degree of security as a lock. It's just collecting data. You can't send anything to a data collecting device which would cause any major problems or anything. So there are definite levels of security, different degrees of security which you may want to apply to your application ecosystem, and that always has to be taken into consideration. But there will always be a baseline security, especially where connectivity is concerned. So, and again, I'll come on to that regarding recommendations and guidelines. So this normally means cryptography, as Alper explained, which we have for protecting the LoRa packets, the frames, and again, using TLS and things like that to protect higher bandwidth data through the network elements in the LoRaWAN backend system. So constrained devices, they're often low power, they're battery powered, they may have to last for years. So that provides a certain amount of constraints on what security we can use. Some security has a lot of cryptographic operations which can consume a lot of power. So we want to try and limit that to some extent, but still retain a level of security. again, limited CPU and memory capabilities. These are often microcontrollers with kilobytes and small numbers of megabytes of memory, not gigabytes as you'd expect in a PC. The wireless connectivity itself is often limited capacity, low bandwidth. Again, LoRaWAN, it's not sort of Wi-Fi type of bandwidth, anything like that. It's a lower bandwidth. So again, we have to take that into consideration in terms of handshakes of data, how much data we can send in handshakes and things like that. And also it's important, a lot of these devices have a very limited user interface. If you're lucky, they may have a button or a couple of LEDs on them. Some have displays, but often they don't have any interface at all. Sensors, things like that, you put them in the field or clip them, put them wherever you want them, kind of turn them on and that's it really, and they just should then act as a sensor. Often these devices are deployed long term, so you put them in the field and leave them there. You shouldn't have to go back to them every week. Again, you don't have access to it, say like a PC where you can just walk up to it and do something with it. And often with these devices, it's not about the user. So again, a PC, you have user accounts and user privileges, but this is more about the device itself and its role in the overall application for either collecting data or acting on a message sent to it, that sort of thing. So its identity, the identity of the device itself becomes really important, and therefore you want to be able to provision that device with some sort of secure device identity, so it's known about in the whole application ecosystem. So coming on to recommendations and guidelines. So this is it's kind of an evolving field, but more and more recently we've been seeing a lot of recommendations and guidelines around IoT security. There are several published ones, and there's a few examples given in the bottom there. They all generally cover the same security provisions, which I'll come on to in a minute. Most of them set a baseline for, again, IoT product security. And again, I stress product security, so it's about the communication it uses, but also the product itself. And again, as I mentioned earlier, different applications do require different levels of security. Door lock, more secure; toy, less secure. And a lot of these recommendations and guidelines are really focused on consumer IoT products as opposed to, say, industrial or commercial. And again, that's really just due to the ubiquity of them. There's so many of these devices out there. Again, there was a very well publicized attack on CCTV cameras, I think. So again, cheap CCTV cameras with poor security, which were used to, I think, do a denial of service on some, I can't remember what it was, a DNS service or something, which caused a major problem. So we want to try and prevent these sort of things happening in the future, and consumer devices are typically the ones which are going to be targeted the most. So it's likely that legislation will be based on these recommendations and guidelines, and again, I'll come on to that in a slide in a minute. And also product certification schemes will then be guided by the legislation coming out of this. So again, it's possible that if you have to comply to a law, especially, then you'll want some mark or sticker on your device to say, I comply with this legislation. So regarding the recommendation and guidelines, there's some examples here. ETSI is a European standard. It's EN 303645. Again, it's security provisions mainly, and again, I'll just come on to that shortly. NIST IR 8259 and 8425, very similar. This is in the US. And an example of, say, best practices, the IoT Security Foundation has come out with these best practice guidelines. Again, these are links here, so if you get access to this presentation, you can click through these links to get access to these publications. So just to quickly run through what's in the 303645, and as I said, this is an example which would apply to the NIST 8259 as well. Again, the language will be different slightly, but essentially the same sort of provisions. So no universal default passwords. Again, you don't want sort of baked in admin, so anyone can access it easily. If you're going to use passwords in these devices, which is typically not for LoRaWAN probably, but maybe in certain circumstances, again, you want to make sure you have an initial randomized default password. Implement the means to manage report of vulnerabilities. Again, this is more around probably the product ecosystem. So if you buy a device and and you find a vulnerability with it, there should be a way you can report that vulnerability, CVE type of database. Bug bounties often come in where people will reward people if a hacker, a sort of ethical hacker, finds a vulnerability with these devices. Keep software updated. Well, we've already mentioned the firmware update over the air. That's an ideal way to do that. Securely store sensitive security parameters. So we have keys in LoRaWAN. They should be stored securely. Communicate securely. We've already explained in detail about how LoRaWAN gives you that secure foundation for communicating securely. Minimize exposed attack surfaces. So this is the perimeter security where you want to try and prevent anybody getting into the device and being able to interfere with it or subvert it in any way. So an obvious one is to ensure, say, a debug port is closed off in a production device, and therefore no one can just plug in a JTAG device and start reading memory, that sort of thing. Ensure software integrity. Again, the firmware, we say, has to be signed if you're downloading it. You can use mechanisms like secure boot to make sure that when you start the device up, the signature of the device in memory something's been tampered with. It's the same as it was when it was delivered to that device, either in production or over the air. Ensure that personal data is secure. Again, this is around rules like GDPR in Europe, where it's all about individuals' data shouldn't be easily accessible. So if there is any what's called personally identifiable information, PII, in these devices, or even in the back-end system at the application server, it has to be stored securely. Make systems resilient to outages. Again, devices in the field may suffer power outages. You want to make sure that they reboot in a controlled way and they don't sort of lose all their data, that sort of thing. So this often requires non-volatile storage of things like counters and secure storage of keys, obviously non-volatile, and that sort of thing. Examine system telemetry data. So this is really sometimes called things like anomaly detection. So this is often done at the application server, where, say, if somebody attacked and subverted a device in the field and got it to start sending a lot of data, you may suddenly see that device sending 10 times as much data as it did the day before. And then anomaly detection would pick that up and say that's unusual, and flag it up and say maybe you should go and check that device. There might be something wrong with it. Make it easier for users to delete user data. Well, again, that goes with the earlier bullet about protecting personal data. The user owns their data. They should be able to make sure it's protected and be able to remove it from the device, the system, as required at their behest, sort of thing. Make installation and maintenance of devices easy. Again, it seems an obvious thing to say, but the easier it is to install and maintain a device, the less confusing it gets and the less backdoors or avenues an attacker might find to get in to do something it shouldn't do. And finally, validate input data. Again, sometimes this is done through things like fuzz testing, where you can try and send rogue packets, crafted packets to a device to make sure it doesn't crash it easily. And again, that sort of goes along with the keep software updated, ensure software integrity, make sure everything works properly. So these are in the back of this 303645 document and are very useful to understand about IoT secure products. So again, on the basis of recommendations and guidelines, some organizations are looking at IoT security and methodologies around that and certification. So there's a mixture of these recommendations, methodologies, certification. To be honest, up to now, there aren't many that well-established certification programs. There are a couple of organizations who are starting to bring them out. Some programs like PSA certified are really aimed more at the chips, the IoT microcontrollers, and insisting that they have a certain amount of root of trust and things like that, and their architecture is in a certain way which allows secure storage and that sort of thing. Some, like the common criteria, EL67 and the FIPS 140, they're really aimed at really highly secure devices and tend to have quite a strict certification program, costly certification program, which is generally impractical for low-cost IoT devices, which is often the case for the LoRaWAN devices, say, agriculture, some of these sensor devices, you can't have a really expensive program around some of these devices. And other consumer devices, again, consumer devices very cost sensitive, so you can't make it too expensive to certify it around the security. Sometimes what's been looked at is a hierarchical approach. So this is about using a component, say a chip, which has been through a degree of certification, and then that chip itself will be used in a platform, and that platform itself may have been through additional security certification. So when it comes to building your product, you can inherit those certifications and then just do additional security testing, which concerns the product and maybe the application it's going into as well. But I think in all of this, it's an evolving picture. It's rapidly moving. So I think certainly the LoRa Alliance, the security working group, is keeping an eye on all these things. And we have actually some work being undertaken regarding specifying sort of device security level classifications. So that's work being done right now by the LoRa Alliance. So again, I mentioned legislation. Again, these are all links, so you can click on these. Again, just mentioning a few jurisdictions here. So the EU has Cyber Resilience Act and the Radio Equipment Directive. The Cyber Resilience Act is more about the IoT product security, whereas the Radio Equipment Directive is more about ensuring devices can't be subverted to cause interference and things like that. But they overlap to some degree. Product security in the UK, Cybersecurity Improvement Act, that's really for federal information systems, but these often move over to other devices. And again, cybersecurity mark is it's not legislative at the moment, but it's a stamp, proposed stamp for devices. Could become de facto. In other words, why would I not buy a product? Why would I buy a product without one of these on? You just wouldn't. Brazil, Japan, yeah, there's a couple of links there. And again, it's not an exhaustive list, and I think more regulation is in the pipeline for a number of jurisdictions. So just quickly going to best practices. I've mentioned some of these already. The main thing to emphasize is that LoRaWAN Security Foundation in its protocols and specifications gives you a solid base on which to build a secure IoT product. And that's really important. There's some of these things here. Obviously, we recommend the use of the over-the-air activation, which Alper talked about, and random root keys, very important. So you can't just use the same root key in different devices. And again, ensure the EUIs conform to the IEEE standard. Ensure the dev address format complies with the LoRaWAN specification. Again, it's described how certain fields in that should be. Store root and session keys securely, and if necessary, if demanding hardware-based, for some applications you want hardware-based high-end security, so you can use secure elements and hardware security modules, HSNs, to actually give you additional protection around key storage. Implement the firmware update over there. That will definitely give you the ability to upgrade the device in the future if there are any vulnerabilities discovered. And again, cryptographic data protection, we have that through the protocols. Ensure that it's protected in the device as well, especially if it's personal data. Again, build a robust device. Again, physically protect the device, shut off debug ports, that sort of thing. Have temporary protection if necessary. Some devices may require. Ensure the firmware is thoroughly tested. You don't want it to crash, which could cause all sorts of problems, obviously. So you want to make sure it's thoroughly tested, and that includes things like fuzz testing to make sure it doesn't fall over if it receives a corrupted message, that sort of thing. And we've already talked about the use of non-volatile storage. That's important too. Consider the whole cradle-to-grave lifetime of the device, commissioning it, personalizing it, when it's made at the manufacturer, but also think about, is it going to be reused again? How do I destroy any data on there? The end of lifing it, making sure that if you dispose of it, that any data is removed from it. And again, it should be easy to commission devices and maintain these devices. Already talked about that. And again, application server, if required, just check the data coming in and look for expected patterns. And if you see any deviation from that, you may want to consider that that device has something wrong with it. It may not be an attack, it might just be a malfunction. But again, it's useful to understand the whole ecosystem, especially when it's devices which may be diversely spread out over a wide geographical area. And just to quickly mention LoRaWAN certified. So LoRaWAN LoRa Alliance has a certification scheme, which is mainly for the L2 specification conformance. And again, that proves that a device meets the L2 specification, which is where the protection described by Alper is specified. So again, to ensure conformance, you self-certification, and to make sure your own devices are certified, and if you're using other people's devices in your system, make sure they're certified as well. And there's a link there to give you much more information about certification. So just a quick one page on the security working group. So this is a group I head up in the LoRa Alliance. Well, I don't head it up as such, but I sort of maintain the group and to run the calls and make sure it will run smoothly. And the idea is we do these sort of things where we check the LoRaWAN specifications, we work with the technical committee to address any of these issues which may come up during specification development. We evaluate evolving security topics. So, you know, if we see things like, you know, say a crypto algorithm becomes compromised, which is unlikely, but it could happen, we would in that case say, well, we need to consider that in the evolution of the specification. And as Alper mentioned earlier, crypto agility, we're now building that into future specifications. So this allows more flexibility for things like that. Just general security architecture evolution. Again, it's a very fast changing landscape here. Devices are coming out more with built-in security features. So again, we could look at that as, are there any implications for the overall LoRaWAN architecture, which we may need to consider. Again, we get a number of external publications. So some of these are critical of LoRaWAN. Again, we need to look at all these and go, okay, they're maybe making a point there, or at least we need to be aware of what people are saying about LoRaWAN out there with regards to security. And lastly, we provide technical guidance to the members and marketing committee through the technical recommendations. So we help in developing some of those. So that's me. I'd like to pass you back over to Chansey now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. All right, so for the final portion of this webinar, here we have some benefits, some of the many benefits of joining the LoRa Alliance. Becoming a member has been proven to grow businesses, boost networks, and accelerate product development. And as a member, you will have the opportunity to join the security working group and contribute. All right. If you would like to learn more about LoRaWAN Security, you can visit these pages and previous webinars on the LoRa Alliance website. The links are included in the slide deck or in the resources box on your screen as well. All right, the LoRa Alliance has recently launched an accreditation program. This is a technical proficiency exam that will test your knowledge of the LoRaWAN standard and its implementation. We provide you with tons of reference materials and offer a practice test that you can take an unlimited number of times. So become a LoRaWAN expert and get your certificate. You can boost your resume, your profile, and your professional opportunity. Join us in Tokyo on October 11th and 12th for LoRaWAN Live, hosted by the LoRa Alliance. It will feature live demos, panel discussions, a poster session, and an innovations marketplace. So come learn and network and take advantage of opportunities presented within the LoRaWAN ecosystem. You can scan that QR code to learn more and to register. And now we will transition to the Q&A portion of this webinar.
All right, so let's look at what questions we have. We already have a few questions, and now is the best time to add more. Please go right ahead and add your questions to the Q&A box. So let me start with the first question. Question is, in the OTAA case, we have a pre-shared key that allows us to do symmetric encryption and authentication. Is there no form of asymmetric keys foreseen by the protocol? So what do you think, Robert? How would we answer this?
Yeah, so we have actually been looking at this in the security working group, and there is a proposal to use asymmetric cryptography based on static key pairs. The advantage of using static key pairs is that we don't actually have to do a handshaking mechanism. Problem with using handshaking mechanisms and asymmetric cryptography is that the messages for handshaking can be quite large, and this could put a bit of a burden on a LoRa radio system where the packets tend to be quite small. However, we are developing the static key-based one, and we'll take that further. This is kind of in addition to the L2 specification, as it's more about the personalization of the devices. But watch this space for something on that. So we hope to get something out soon on that. Back to you, Alper.
Yep, thank you, Robert. All right, and the next question is about jamming. Any experience or standards with jamming detection, prevention gateways for LoRa specifically? So let me take a stab at that question. Clearly, physically, because we're using wireless communication, the jamming does play a role in that. And one of the when you detect high amount of packet loss, if you're also detecting an increased CRC errors, it is likely that your network might be subjected to jamming. And not in the standard, but in the gateway products, the base station products, there's a way to do an RF scan. And by conducting an RF scan, you can detect if there is a high level of noise, which would be triggering the CRC errors and the packets being corrupted. So there's a way to detect there's jamming in a given area. But like I said, it's not part of the standard, it's part of the products, and it's typically called an RF scan. And in fact, I've been part of such an activity around a month ago. The network, one of our partners' network did encounter significant packet loss, and they were wondering what might be happening, and there was some activity in that area that could be subject to jamming by the police forces, and we could run the RF scan to really detect that there was the jamming had started on a particular day that was anticipated. So yes, but like I said a couple of times, it's not part of the standard, but there are tools out there. If you want to add anything, Robert, feel free to jump in.
No, I think you've covered that well, Alper.
And next one is, have you ever encountered any attack of type join requested drowning, consuming all the dev nonce available? All right, you want to take a step at this one, Robert?
Yeah, I've not come across any of this, but obviously we're interested in hearing any evidence of these sort of attacks and a description of them. So if we can obviously investigate this further and see if there's any papers published on this. We do try and keep up to date on papers, and I've not seen this in any of the papers mentioned so far. There have been some discussion about keeping, the nonces have to increase, so we learn about things like ensuring that it's stored in non-volatile, so you can't go back and replay attack and that sort of thing. So generally, we try and take care of things like that, but I've not seen anything. Have you seen anything, Alper?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that either regarding depleting the dev nonces. Like you said, we monotonically increment the dev nonces, and there are 64,000 of them that is paired for a given dev UI and join UI. And in a typical lifetime of a device, clearly they wouldn't be depleted, but could there be a way to trigger the end device to send join requests faster than it normally would, right? It really depends on the implementation, and certainly we do recommend implementations to safeguard themselves against such external triggers. So there's a duty cycle limitation. At least for that reason, the device could not be sending such frequent join requests. And also for better consumption reasons too, it should not be. And the implementations should keep track of how fast the join requests are being sent out. And in our specification, we even talked about if there's any chance the dev nonce space might be consumed by the given end device, there's already another remedy, which is to use multiple join UIs of the join server, because the dev nonce space is bound to the dev UI join UI pair. If you ever, which is very unlikely, but if you ever were to deplete dev nonce space, if your device is configured to use another join UI against the same join server, it can go back to dev nonce 0 and then keep incrementing again, because that would be a fresh triple to prevent any replay attacks. All right, so we had only 3 questions. So if you're still pondering about more, please do put them in. There comes another one. Okay. Also, okay, here's the next one. Also, a legit join request captured and repeated can overload the server with cryptographic operations. Well, actually, it would not really overload the server with cryptographic operations, because what the join server would do is it'll check the dev nonce. If it's an already used dev nonce, then it won't even do any crypto check. So there's minimum computation to take place before the join server can declare it's a replay. It wouldn't be an effective denial of service attack on the join server. All right. Other questions, please? Thank you, Sergio, for the last 2 questions, and Jonas and Paolo for the earlier ones. All right. While we're waiting, in case we don't have any further questions, do you have any final remarks, Robert?
No, not really. Just, it's good to give these webinars, and I hope it's been useful to people to understand, especially around IoT security. And obviously, what I think it proves is that LoRaWAN does provide what I'd like to say is a secure foundation. That's the term I like to use now. In other words, it's something you can build on. It's a good solid base on which to build a secure product and a secure system.
Thank you, Robert. And in addition to all the things that we talked about, I'll highlight that if the audience or the community has any questions, feel free to, regarding security, feel free to reach out to us at security@LoRaAlliance.org. We would be more than happy to hear from you. So seeing there are no more questions, would like to thank the audience for being with us today and also sharing their questions. And thank you all. And okay, one more question popped up. All right, okay. The question is, can you review how the OTAA keys are securely exchanged at the start of a session? Robert, do you want to take that one?
There's no actual exchange as such at the start of a session. So the root keys are provisioned in the device before the join procedure. So that's the apt key. So that's part of the personalization. Just the root key, and then the over-the-air activation causes the keys, the session keys, to be derived at both the join server and the end device. So there's no actual exchange of any keys. It's done using a cryptographic key derivation process.
Right, and somewhat related to earlier, the first question, use of public key cryptography. So we're using symmetric keys so that requires appreciate keys be in place. Then we start with the handshake. And this is very much the same with the cellular networks as well, 3G, 4G, 5G. Whether it's on a SIM card or embedded on the mobile terminal, there's a secret key in place, and then it's used for a cryptographic handshake. It's again a symmetric key cryptography, both in cellular world and also in LoRaWAN. And that's how we jumpstart. And how that key got in place, it's part of the manufacturing. It might be stored in software. It might be stored in secure element. And that means the key is really burned into the secure element chip in the secure element vendor and placed on the end device hardware. But these are the key provisioning. Those are all taking place before the OTAA procedure. All right. Any other question? Final few seconds before we go back to thanking again the closing ceremony. All right. Okay. Again, from Sergio, any chance of including ECC certificates in the protocol in the future? Robert, similar to the first question.
Yes, that's right. So obviously, ECC certificates are quite large in size. Even a sort of typical IoT device type of certificate, you're talking 500 odd bytes, around 400 to 500 bytes. So including that in the handshake at the beginning, it's a lot of messages. I mean, it's not impossible to do, and I think in certain situations it may be feasible because it doesn't happen very often. But certainly, as Alper said, there are duty cycle limitations, frame sizes are small, which require some sort of fragmentation and reassembly mechanism, lots of things like that, which, again, all possible, but we're not thinking of specifying things like that into the protocol right now. So again, this may occur perhaps as an additional mechanism, which then happens at the beginning of an application session, for example, if you wanted to provide extra security on the end-to-end application. So the application payload itself can have whatever security it wants on top of the foundation provided by the LoRaWAN protocol. But certainly there's no intention to build it into the specification right now. But again, everything evolves all the time. We have talked about it in the security working group. So we're always open to ideas coming from members. So feel free to join the Alliance and the security working group and contribute. We're always happy to have new contributors and members.
Yeah, and on that last point, the security working group is open to all members of the LoRa Alliance. The committees where the working groups and task forces are hosted, they're only open to sponsor, contributor, and institutional members, whereas the working groups and task force underneath, including security working group, is also open to adopter members. So if you are already a member, we highly recommend you come and join the security working group. And if you are not a member, please do join the LoRa Alliance. We certainly do appreciate more involvement from the community, not only for consuming what the Alliance does, but also to contributing to it and becoming part of this journey together with us. All right. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else popping up. Your fingers are on the keyboard. Go right ahead. Type in your question. Otherwise, we are about to adjourn this session. I would say let's do it. All right, then. Thank you all for joining, and everyone have a great day now.
Thank you very much.